We are back on the Friday Baseball Show, Stan the Fan, along with Griffin Bass. And joining us right now is someone who's become a very popular guest. He's probably sick of me calling him Dan Zielinski III of Baseball Prospect Journal. Dan, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. I always enjoy talking baseball with you guys. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Dan, and by the way, Dan's X account is at Dan Zielinski III. At Dan Zielinski III. You can follow him on Twitter/X. Dan, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on so badly after the deadline is how much the Orioles minor league system has been impacted by the trade deadline, and they are now number two in in the minor league, the prospect rankings. Is that an accurate position for the Orioles right now, Dan?
I think so. To me, they're for sure a top five system in baseball with what they've done over the last year between the 2025 draft, the 26 draft, and now the trade deadline. You can make an argument their top five or so prospects at least have all been acquired within the last year. So I really like what they did at the deadline in the Adley Rutschman trade. I like what they did in the draft. They added a lot of guys with some upside, and it's really an intriguing class now for the Orioles here with their top prospects because they got a nice mix of some really high-end position players as well as some really intriguing pitchers too.
Did they get much at last deadline a year ago? I know they got Boston Bateman. Is there much else that they got in those trades?
No, not high-end guys. A lot of either lottery tickets or kind of low ceiling type players. I think obviously this year's trade deadline was a lot more exciting, and I really like the players they got this year compared to last year. Really, I think what's made this system so successful is what they did really this year. But you got guys like an Ike Irish or a few other players from last year's draft too that have supplemented the top of this prospect group for the Orioles.
What's fascinating to me is at the deadline last year, remember they traded Sir Anthony Dominguez for Jerron Watts Brown. And I'm not saying that he's a failed prospect already, but he's nowhere in the top 30 now. Whereas last year, I think after the deadline, he was like number 8 or 9 in the Orioles system.
Exactly. I mean, Watts Brown was a guy coming out of Oklahoma State a few years back. That was an intriguing player, but never really performed up to expectations. Ended up being a third round pick in 2023 by the Blue Jays. And was a guy considered, some people thought maybe entering that draft cycle was someone who could be a number two type pitcher in pro ball, but really never materialized. And most considered, once that draft rolled around to be maybe a fringe middle of the rotation type guy or back end of the rotation guy. And I think that first off, it speaks to the players the Orioles have brought in that he's not, in their top 30. It
Yeah.
also speaks to maybe the lack of development or lack of success, whoever you kind of want to put the blame on there for Watts Brown's, lack of trajectory at this point of his career.
You know what I see when I looked at his numbers recently, and I don't want to spend that much time on Watts Brown, but I see a guy that should be converted to a leverage arm. That's what I see.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, I think at this point too, he's proven he can't thrive or succeed at a high level against lesser competition in the minor leagues as a starter.
Yeah.
Sure, he might be giving you some innings, but just the results aren't there. I think that's a great point. He does have the pitch mix that could thrive in that role using his fastball and breaking pitch to really just kind of dominate hitters in a 1, 2 inning type relief appearance. I think that's actually a pretty good idea, especially with some of the starting pitching prospects they now have in their system.
Yeah.
Reminds
Um,
me of
yeah,
the
go
way
ahead.
you used to talk about DL Hall, Stan, the way that the Orioles wouldn't give up on him being a starter and then
Yeah,
eventually
well,
shipped
I've been around. One of the things about getting old
him.
is you've been around a long time and you've seen this movie before, and you can waste somebody who actually could help your ball club. You get set in these roles. Dan, I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned before the onus is now on the organization. They clearly, industry wide, they're respected for the level of talent they have. If you talk to people in your field, not baseball people that work for teams, but other people in the industry. What do they think of the Orioles' ability to develop players?
That's a great question. To me, it's not great. I mean, we've seen that over the last 5 years. They tore it down to rebuild and hopefully have this wave of young prospects come up and build a championship level team. And I mean, they can't even get into the playoffs, it seems
Yeah.
like most years. So it hasn't been great. I think that's a little bit surprising because you brought in Mike Elias, who came from the Astros, and the Astros were well known for their player development system, and it just hasn't materialized. I think part of it is some of it's luck. It always there's luck, and there's also guys just didn't pan out. But I think there's also some areas where we've seen the pitching side, especially the Orioles, have not developed really any key impact guys at a high enough level. Yeah, sure, they've had, some maybe decent starters or a quality reliever, but nothing, elite that's going to shut down teams. So I think that's the biggest area that they need to see growth on is pitching development because they just haven't had it. The hitters, sure, Jackson Holiday hasn't panned out so far. Still a young guy. Maybe he'll figure it out. And even some of their other guys, while they've produced, they haven't been super. But I think to me, the more bigger concern is on the pitching side because for the Orioles, they're not going to go sign a $300 million pitcher. So you have to be able to develop that from within.
It's interesting. I see the development a little differently now. It seemed like there was Matt Blood, and that was the guy who was in charge of it. Now I see a Mike Schild on the upper level, player development. I see a Forrest Herman on the pitching side of things. With the pitching, I don't think Mike Elias put an awful lot of equity into his pitching program. It's all turned around now. I mean, now I see 14 of the top 30 are pitchers.
Yeah, that's a great point too, and that's something we talked about a lot during, the draft time was how the Orioles seem to always pick position players early on in the draft and then maybe trade for starting pitching with some of their prospects later on. But that's a great point. I think I'm curious really to see they've got a group of, pitchers towards the top of their farm system in Double A mostly, and a few guys in Triple A that we're going to see in the next year, year and a half, what some of these guys are made of. So I think, the returns are going to show themselves here relatively soon. If, the Orioles pitching development is legit or, if they've got some work to do still in that area.
Griff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mentioned a couple of those names that you're obviously referencing, Dan, and I mean, it's interesting. You look at Joseph Zerwa and Caden Hunter, who kind of came out of nowhere, at least this season. Took both guys
Yeah.
that were drafted last year, and that development side that they've been having a really good 2026. So hopefully that continues. And then Anthony Ianson, who immediately jumps into the top two in the whole system, who was the prize of the Adley Rutschman deal. What do you think could be a realistic timetable for him, assuming he continues to progress and obviously health?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Anthony Ianson. As I was telling Stan right after the trade happened for Adley Rutschman, I couldn't believe what the Red Sox gave up to acquire Adley Rutschman. I know he's got a year and a half of team control, but he's just not. Sure, he was an all-star this year, but he's not a superstar. He's not a top five catcher in the sport. But the Red Sox paid up, and Ianson especially. He's a guy that could be a number two starter down the line. A big time fastball, two really good breaking pitches, and even throws in a splitter that's really solid as well. But he's someone that really has the complete mix when it comes to the pitching side. And I really like his fastball and how it plays. He's got the velocity, it has some movement, and he's really progressed throughout his career. He does a nice job of filling the strike zone and is super athletic on the mound. I think he's a guy that definitely could be in the major leagues next year. It really depends, how aggressive the Orioles want to be. First off, obviously, is there a season? But then, do they want to start him in the major leagues right away, or do they start him in the minor leagues and call him up, say, in June? To me, if I was the Orioles, I'd have him in AAA right now. I don't think there's anything left for him to prove in AA. I would let him go to AAA, see how he does the rest of the year, and to me, I would start him in the major leagues next year. I think Ianson's super close. I think he's really good and excited to see his future with the Orioles.
Another
Yeah.
guy that's really close. And it's kind of funny that they had Michael Forret in the organization last year, traded him, and now they bring him back in the Tyler Wells deal. How much do you know about Michael Forret? And he's a guy who is in AAA and has been pitching pretty well.
Yeah, like you said, he's, had a really nice year this year, had a really good year last year too. And someone that, again, he attacks the strike zone. He's had big strikeout numbers this year. He's not maybe as sexy of a prospect as Ianson, but he just does everything really well. Really balanced pitch mix, decent fastball velocity, breaking pitches work and get swings and misses. He's a guy that, again, like you said, really close to me, another guy that I could see in the mix in 2027 to break camp with a major league club if all things go well. Might not have the upside as an Ianson, but I think he could be a quality major league starter in the future.
Interesting. Um, the impact of the two people I've talked to you about a moment ago, Mike Schild and Forrest Herman, when you talk to people in the industry, are they respected for what they're doing now with the Orioles organization?
I think so. A lot of it comes down to it's a results driven business, right? So it's gonna, time will tell what these guys are able to accomplish. They're certainly respected in regards to what they've done in the past and the success they've had, but it's going to come down to, what can they do with the Orioles, especially, in a situation where the organization's at where it's kind of, the first rebuild a few years ago hasn't panned out, so they're kind of in this mini, step back in hopes of, figuring it out in the next couple of years. So time will tell. I think people are really intrigued with this farm system, like we talked about, for sure, in my mind, one of the top five systems in baseball, if not even better than that. So, and you got guys that are relatively on the verge of the major leagues. So it's not like you're taking a 16, 17, 18-year-old, foreign born kid and trying to just develop him from scratch almost. You got guys that have pitched or played in the minor leagues. They have some experience, they've had success. Now it's just a matter of maximizing those skills to get them major league ready.
Let me ask you a question. The number of pitching prospects now, can that be a little bit of fool's gold in terms of re-signing Trevor Rogers? In other words, I think I see where the club is heading with this. I think they'll be competitive to bring him back, but can they be misled by saying, well, we got Forret, we got Ianson, we got all this stuff. This is a guy that's sort of a proven major league pitcher right
Right.
now. Would you be fooled by what you're seeing with Brandon Young and those prospects where you just say, well, we'll let him walk because $140 million is too much money?
No, see, my mindset would be, and if I'm the Orioles, I think it's important that you have at least a couple veteran arms in that rotation. It's tough to have a rotation filled with young guys, especially that don't have experience. You need at least a couple of those veteran
Yeah.
guys to mentor these younger pitchers. Is it Trevor Rogers? I don't know. It depends how much the Orioles want to spend, but I think you need at least two or three veteran guys in there. First off, because when you call these young guys up, they're not going to pitch a ton of innings. We've seen Major League Baseball teams like to be very conservative with their young pitchers and not want to, overdo it with the workload. So you need numbers in that regard. And you also need guys that have been there, done that, know what it takes to pitch 6 innings, have success the third time through the lineup. So I think having some veteran experience in the rotation is really key for development and also just overall team success.
Dan, one of the people I mentioned just a second ago is Brandon Young, unheralded, but undrafted free agent that the Orioles signed, and he's been fantastic this year. Compared to what we thought we'd get out of him. How often have you seen teams get fooled by penciling him in as a guy that'll pitch 180 innings next year, win 13, 14 games, and they take a step back? Does that happen a lot in your observations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. It's pitching development is so finicky and so difficult that teams, have really leaned on, the pitch mixes and what guys throw and can they get the most out of them. But there's always guys, as someone who lives in Milwaukee and has covered the Milwaukee Brewers for many years, the Brewers are a prime example of that. They've taken guys off the street. They've taken unknown prospects and turned them into major league starters. So I think it happens more than you would think, just because it's so tough to develop pitching, and one injury sometimes can ruin a guy's potential trajectory, career. So I think it happens more than you think, but there's always it's always a risk. There's always, difficulties on both sides of whether it's a top prospect versus a guy that's kind of an unknown. It's just all about kind of consistency, development, and hopefully, Young, for example, can do it again next year. Because that's really the tell sign is once, teams know a pitcher, have seen him at least once or twice, how does a pitcher then come back and kind of adjust to what, hitters are doing, because the hitters know kind of have a game plan against those pitchers as well.
A pitcher is not an Oriole prospect, and he's more than a prospect, is Paul Skeens.
Hmm.
He's in his sophomore season. He's suffering some little bit of the sophomore jinx, isn't he?
Yeah, Paul Skeens is an interesting case because he said how he's not trying to throw as hard because he's trying to, go longer in games and, prolong his career, and, doesn't necessarily need to use his velocity to get guys out. But, the numbers show that when he was throwing harder, he was having more success. So part of me wonders if there's a little bit more to that story than that's being released by him and the Pirates. What's really unique too about the Pirates, in my mind, is I think they've got a team that could be a dangerous playoff team if they got in, but they have pitchers like a Paul Skeens, for example, that have underperformed this year. Because if their pitching staff perform, those starters, to the expectations and level that they've shown at times throughout their career, they could be a dangerous team. But they need someone like a Paul Skeens to be Paul Skeens of 2024 and 2025 in order for them to even have a chance to make the postseason.
Griff, go ahead.
I guess what position players for the Orioles are you most excited about coming up, Dan? I mean, it's really unfortunate. Ike Irish had a season-ending injury in July,
Yeah.
and he was having a fantastic year at Single A with Frederick. But Vihila Lloyd just got promoted to Double A. I saw Brandon Butterworth he's not one of their top 10 prospects, but Butterworth just got promoted to Triple A for the Orioles. And then obviously Eric Booth Jr. Is there anyone I didn't mention?
Yeah. First off, with Ike Irish, huge fan of his, have been a big fan of his throughout college, even when he was in high school. Disappointing that injury happened because, I really like his potential. I'm curious to see how a guy like Ty Head, I know he was just a recent draft pick, how he does in this limited sample size he gets between now and the end of the year. He was a guy that was kind of a high risk, high reward type player at NC State. You know, was a guy with a lot of speed, kind of reminded me a little bit of a Vance Honeycutt type player. I'm curious to see how he adjusts to pro ball and what he's able to accomplish over this next month. Because being a second round pick, there's definitely some high expectations for him to produce and move through the system quickly. But he didn't always have the consistency and really struggled at times at the plate at NC State. So I'm curious to see how Ty Head does over this next year or over this next month, leading in then to his first full year next year. I'm not a big Enrique Bradfield Jr. type
I was
guy.
gonna ask. Yeah.
Um, again, I mean,
The speed and defense are undeniable.
exactly. And this is the same argument, I've had with people, or conversation I've had with people since he's been in college. Great defensively, great speed, but he doesn't hit enough. And again, in the major leagues or in professional baseball, he hasn't hit enough. And definitely, I'm not even more concerned about, impacting the baseball, because we've seen guys have success without hitting a lot of home runs, but he's not even getting on base to use that speed or put the ball in play to have success and driving the baseball into the gap. So I think Enrique Bradfield and the Orioles are in a tough spot because 17th overall pick in 2023, and he really never has had a great full season since he's joined the organization. So I think next year is a big year for him and kind of the future of what's going to happen with Enrique Bradfield. So not having a great year this year, next year is a big year for him.
Last thing I've got for you, Dan. We focus so much on those pitching prospect acquired. Tell me a little bit about what you know about Endy Azakar, Harold Rivas, who were the two guys we got from Boston that weren't pitchers, and also the guy we got back who's number 24 in the Orioles system right now, and that is Gimnardo Reyes, the outfield.
Yeah.
Wow.
Esakar, he's a guy that is more power over average at this point. Defensively, he's solid. He's nothing special, but he's definitely a guy that can handle the outfield position. And still a young player. I'm curious to see how he does. He needs to really improve that hit tool because the power is there, but he's got to be able to tap into that power more consistently. We've seen him have a really good year overall this season. Definitely an improvement from last year as well. And someone that still strikes out at a high clip, but still a young player. So I'm curious to see how he does moving forward. And you talk about Rivas. He's a guy that was kind of the last piece in that deal from the Red Sox, and someone that's really intriguing to me because he's really quick. I think is someone that can handle center field long term because of that speed, above average arm strength. And people have compared him to George Springer because he's from Venezuela, because of just the way he plays. And he's someone that's, had some success, but is still extremely young at 18 years old. But the tools are there that if he can put it all together and figure it out at the plate, he could be a well-rounded player in the future. And then your last guy that you mentioned was,
Gimnardo Reyes from
yeah,
the Twins.
yeah, Reyes. He's another guy that maybe hasn't had quite the year people expected him to have after last season. Another guy that's more power over hit, but someone that, again, big ceiling for him. I think the one thing with all three of these guys is they all carry a lot of risk, but they also have super high ceilings too. So I think if you're the Orioles and you're just kind of, looking at it in general, if you can hit on one of these guys and get an all-star out of one of the three, that's successful in my mind, because they all carry risk. All are solid in the outfield defensively. It's really going to come down to that hit tool for all three of them, and if they can, impact the baseball at a high enough clip.
All right. He is Dan Zielinski III. He is with Baseball Prospect Journal, and we appreciate it again. And follow him on X at Dan Zielinski, the number 3. And he does a great job. Dan, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks, guys. Always enjoy it. We'll talk soon.
All right.